Hey guys, before tonight's journey begins, take a moment to settle in. Find the position your body wants to rest in. Loosen anything that feels tight. Let your shoulders drop and let the day you have carried begin to set itself down. Tonight we are walking through a year in the Lake District. From a cold morning at a cottage door to the last of the moonlight on a road coming home. There is nothing here you need to follow closely. The story moves at the pace of breathing, and it is meant to carry you gently towards sleep. If these quiet journeys help you rest, you are warmly welcome to follow the channel so that another evening like this one can find you when you need it. A quiet like, or a few words left below about where you're listening from tonight, helps others discover these stories too. There is no hurry to do any of it. It can wait until morning, or it can wait forever. None of it asks anything of you now. For now, there is only this, the warmth around you, the slow settling of the night, a long, gentle story waiting to begin. So let your eyes close if they wish to. Let your breathing slow, and when you are ready, we will step out through a low cottage door into the air of an early morning. The year is 1800, and the door of a small cottage in Grasmere is standing open onto a road that isn't much wider than a cart. Beyond it, the fells go up grey and wet into low cloud, and the lake below them has gone the colour of pewter. It's early, the kind of early where the air still has the night in it, and nothing has been decided about the day yet. A woman is standing in that doorway with her cloak already on, looking at the sky the way you'd look at a clock. She's about 30. She lives here with her brother, in 4 small rooms with a fire that has to be coaxed. And in a few moments she's going to step out onto that road and walk, and by tonight she'll have written down where she went and what the light did and who she met. Tomorrow she'll do it again. She'll do it in rain. She'll do it in wind that comes down off the fell hard enough to lean on. She'll do it in snow, and she'll do it after dark by whatever moon there is. And here's the thing I keep turning over. She isn't walking for her health. That idea hasn't been invented yet, not really. Nobody in that doorway is thinking about steps or miles or what it's doing for them. She isn't walking to get somewhere in the way we mean it either, because half the time there's nowhere in particular to get to. She's just going out. Out is the whole of it. I want you to stand here with me for a while and watch her do it, not to learn anything in particular, just to see what a day looks like when moving through it slowly is the only way it's done, when the letter has to be fetched on foot, and the bread has to be fetched on foot, and the news of everyone you love arrives at the speed of a person walking. When the dark isn't a reason to stay in, because the dark is simply the second half of the day, and the moon is the light you have. Think about what that does to a pair of eyes. If you've never in your life gone faster than your own legs, and the same 8 miles of road are the road you've walked 1,000 times, you'd notice things. You'd have to. You'd know which corner has the birch that shakes in a particular way. You'd know which stones the moss goes red on in the spring. You'd come home wet through, and think it worth setting down that by bedtime the cloud had shut over everything and there was white on the grass already. That's what these pages are, the ones I've been reading. Not a book about walking, just a woman writing down, for herself, on ordinary evenings, where her feet took her. 20 times a month sometimes. Walked. Walked to Ambleside. Walked by moonlight. Walked I know not where. So tonight we're going to follow her out. Through a year of it, more or less. The mornings and the errands and the weather she went straight into, the people she passed on the road, the flowers she stopped for, the long dark walks back with supper waiting at 10 o'clock. We'll take it at her pace, which is a slow one, and there's no hurry in any of it. She's still in the doorway. The cloud is sitting low on Silver How, and it may well rain later, and she's looked at it and decided that this doesn't matter in the least. She pulls the door to behind her. The road is right there, going off grey between the walls, and it's going wherever she's going. Come on, she's going. The cottage sits at the bottom end of the village, where the road from Ambleside comes down and levels out, and it's small. 4 rooms, more or less, with a floor of dark slate flags and a ceiling low enough that a tall man learns to duck without thinking about it. The window in the front room looks out at the road and past the road at the water. There's an orchard behind, going up the slope in terraces. More of a steep garden than an orchard, really. And on a morning in early spring, the whole of it is cold. The flags cold, the walls cold, the little window running with the night's damp on the inside where the breath has gathered. The fire is the first argument of the day, It smokes. It smokes so badly on some mornings that the room can't be sat in, and the door has to be opened just to make the place breathable, and once the door is open, you may as well look out of it. That's how a good many of these days seem to start. Not with a decision, with smoke, and a door, and a road lying there. She comes to that door with her cloak already on. It's a long one, wool, the sort of garment that isn't really a coat so much as a shelter you carry, and it goes over everything else she's wearing. There's no other layer to speak of. Nothing waterproof, because waterproof hasn't been thought of yet. Nothing on her feet but leather, thin-soled, mended, the same shoes she'll wear indoors this evening. And she stands there and she looks at the sky. That's the whole of the preparation. She reads the cloud on the fell the way you'd read a face, working out roughly what it means to do, and then, and this is the part I like, she goes out anyway. The reading of the sky isn't a decision procedure, it's just a courtesy, a way of knowing what she's walking into. The answer almost never changes the plan. I want to be honest about something before we go any further. We don't know much about her shoes. She never once writes down what she had on her feet. Not in all those pages, because why would you? You don't record the obvious. So when I picture the leather going soft and dark in the wet, I'm imagining. And you should know I'm imagining. The pages give us the sky and the road and the flowers and the people. Her own body she leaves out almost entirely, which tells you something about what she thought was worth the ink. What she does record, endlessly, is the weather. And I've come to think the two things are connected. A mild morning. A cold, yet sunshiny morning. A miserable, nasty, snowy morning. A threatening morning, rather rainy. The entries open on the sky so often that after a while you stop reading it as description and start reading it as the first fact of the day, the way we might check what time it is. If you're going to spend 4 hours of daylight out in it with nothing but wool between you and the air, the sky isn't scenery, it's the conditions of the contract, and she knows the fells around her by name and by mood, which is a knowledge you only get by looking up at them 10,000 times. Silver, how across the water, Luffrig on the way to Rydale, Helmcrag standing up where the valley ends, its top all rough, looking, she'll say once, like a thing that is its own being. Those aren't landmarks she's learned off a map. They're the 4 or 5 shapes that fill the window of her entire life, and she watches the cloud come down on them and lift off them the way you'd watch the mood of someone you live with. Now, the road. It runs past the door within a few yards, grey and stony and hemmed on both sides by dry stone wall, and it isn't wide. A cart fills it. When 2 carts meet, one of them has to find a gate to back into. In wet weather it goes to mud and the mud stands in the ruts, and in cold weather the ruts freeze into hard little ridges that turn an ankle if you're not paying attention. This is the surface underneath every walk we're going to take tonight. Not a path made for walking, just the way people got from one place to another, worn into the ground by everyone who'd ever needed to. And here's the thing that took me a while to properly feel. There was no other way. Not no better way. No other way at all for her. She had no horse of her own standing in a stable out the back. The coach came through, but the coach cost money that a household living on very little doesn't spend on a trip to the next village. So the distance between her front door and everything else in the world, the bread, the letters, the friends, the news, was measured in her own legs and nothing else. 8 miles was an afternoon, 14 was a long day. That's not hardship in her telling, it's just the shape of the map. It helps to know what the alternative looked like for the people who had one. There's a turnpike down the way, a road kept up by the men who charge you to use it, and along it the coaches run to Kendal and beyond. A gate, a keeper, a toll. For the gentry that's the machinery of travel, and it's the reason a letter can come north at all. But the toll road doesn't go where she's going most days. It goes to the towns, the places she walks to, a friend's house over the fell, a waterfall up a beck, a corner where the birches are. Have no road to them in that sense at all. They have a track, and the track exists because feet made it. Which means the phrase we'd use for what she's about to do doesn't quite work. We'd say she's going for a walk. That has a little frame around it, a sense of an activity carved out from the rest of the day, something you get changed for. She isn't doing that. She's going out. When she writes it down tonight, she'll use the plainest verb in the language and leave it entirely alone. Walked. That's the entry. Sometimes that's the whole entry. Inside, behind her, the house goes on without her, and I don't want to walk out of that door without saying a word about the woman who's still in it. Molly Fisher comes in to help. She's from the village, she's paid a small handful of shillings for the year, and she does the heavy end of the work, the scrubbing, the washing, the hauling. When a basket of plants gets too heavy to carry home, it's Molly who gets sent back down the road to fetch it. When a horse is needed in a hurry, it's Molly who's dispatched to get one. So Molly walks too. Molly walks a great deal, up and down that same road in the same weather on the same errands. Nobody wrote Molly's walks down. We have her only in glancing half lines, sent for the basket, set to clean the garden, saying a kind blunt thing in the doorway about a sick neighbour. There must have been thousands of Mollys on the roads of that country in those years, and not one of them kept a journal. I think about that a lot, and I don't have anywhere tidy to put the thought. It just sits there, next to the pleasure of the pages, and their walking was different in one way that matters. Molly going down the road for the basket is going down the road for the basket. She's carrying something, or she's fetching something, and at the far end of it there's a job. The woman in the doorway has that kind of walk too, plenty of it, and will follow some of those. But she also has the other kind, the kind with no basket in it, and the difference between the two isn't the legs, is whether anyone's waiting at the other end. The bread is another thing that has to be dealt with before the door. There's an oven, and the dough has its own timetable, which is not the same as the timetable of a person who wants to be out. So the walking gets fitted around it. She'll go in and put the bread in the oven, and then come out again and walk within sight of the house, back and forth in view of the road, keeping half an eye on the chimney and the light. That's a real thing she does. Walking in a small tether, 100 yards out and 100 yards back because the loaf can't be left. I find that oddly lovely, and I'm not sure I can explain why. Maybe it's that it takes the grandness out of it. We've built up a whole idea of the solitary walker as a figure of some importance, striding off into the landscape with big thoughts. And here's the actual daily version. Pacing near the gate with an eye on the oven, going nowhere at all, still counting it as a walk, still writing it down. The walk and the bread live in the same hour and neither is above the other. The garden takes its share of the morning too. There are peas to be stuck, which means pushing in the twiggy sticks for them to climb, a job that seems to come round endlessly in those spring entries. Kidney beans and spinach get sown. Broccoli goes in, snowdrops get lifted and moved to a better spot, and she'll note that the bees are already at work while she does it, on a bright day with the frost still hard in the shade. Some days the garden eats the whole afternoon and she never gets past the wall at all, and on those days there's a small flat sentence at the end of the page that I've come to love more than almost anything else in the book. Did not walk. Just that. Did not walk. Too cold, she'll add sometimes, and that's the extent of the excuse. Think about what those 3 words are telling you. You only bother to record a thing's absence when its presence is the rule. Nobody writes, did not fly today. She writes it because walking was the water she swam in, and a day without it was the day that stood out and wanted explaining. That one little phrase does more to show me how much she walked than all 400 entries where she says she did. Out in the orchard there's a seat they built, up on the terrace where the ground rises, and from it you can see down the valley with the water laid out below. A little further along there's a hut of moss they made themselves, a proper thing with a roof, put together over days. This is worth pausing on. They didn't just walk through the landscape, they built small places to stop in the middle of it, so that the going out could have somewhere to arrive that wasn't a house, a seat on a slope, a hut of moss, places whose entire purpose was to be sat in, quietly, looking. The building of that hut takes days and gets its own entries. Moss gathered and carried up and fitted, the roof argued over, the thing admired when it's done and visited afterwards the way you'd visit a friend. And from the seat, at certain hours, the whole valley goes soft and every colour melts into the one beside it, and they'll carry cloaks out and sit on the ground up there for the length of an evening. I like the seriousness of it. These are people with very little money who decided that the important thing to build was somewhere to sit outside. The morning air smells of wood smoke and wet stone and, if the wind's off the fell, of sheep. Redbreasts are singing in the garden. On a mild day the windows get opened at breakfast and the birds come straight into the room as sound, so that the house and the outside are barely separated at all. One thin pane and a wooden door between her and the whole of it, and both of them open half the time. That's another difference I keep noticing. Our indoors is sealed. Hers leaked in every direction all year, and I don't think she'd have thanked you for sealing it. Breakfast is not much. bread and something. Tea maybe, which is expensive and taken seriously. 2 boiled eggs and an apple tart is a dinner worth naming in a letter. There's no great fueling up going on here. No notion that a body about to walk 12 miles needs anything in particular put into it beforehand. She eats what's there, and then she goes out, and that's the sum of the science. In winter, the door opens on the dark, and it stays dark for a good part of what we'd call the morning. There's a candle, and the candle is not free, and the light it makes is a small yellow circle about the size of a face. So you get up into a house that's mostly black, and the one useful piece of information about the day, what's the sky doing, isn't available yet, and won't be for an hour. She waits for it. Then it comes. A grey that isn't the fell and isn't the cloud, but the line where they stop being each other, and the day has begun, and the door can be opened. And here's a small thing that hasn't changed in 200 years, which I find steadying rather than sad. She stands at the door and looks up before going out. You do that. I do that. Everybody who has ever put a hand on a latch has done the same thing. The little upward glance at nothing in particular, checking on the world before joining it. Her sky had more say in her day than mine has in mine. But the gesture is identical, and it's the same gesture, and it goes all the way back. And this is where the gap between us opens widest, I think. When we go out to walk now, we prepare. There's a bag, there's a bottle of water, and the right shoes, and something checking the weather on our behalf, and something else counting the steps and telling us afterwards whether the walk was any good. Every part of that would be incomprehensible to the woman in this doorway. Not disagreeable, incomprehensible. The idea that a walk could be measured, scored, and reported back to you as a number would take a long, patient explanation, and at the end of it she'd want to know what the number was for. Because she's not doing it for anything. That's the piece I keep circling back to. It isn't exercise, since exercise as we mean, it hasn't been invented. And a woman who covers 14 miles on an ordinary Tuesday doesn't need a reason invented for her. It isn't tourism, because she lives here. It isn't therapy, though it plainly does her good. There's no word for it in her language, which is why she reaches for the plainest one available and just says, walked. Some mornings the going out is even simpler than that. She's expecting someone home, or a letter, and she can't sit still in the house. And so she puts her cloak on, and goes and stands out on the road in the dark to listen for a footstep. She'll do that for an hour, lingering out of doors, hoping to hear her brother's tread on the stones. And when nothing comes, she walks a little way along, and comes back, and walks a little way and comes back, and eventually the latch goes, and there he is. I love that the road works that way for her. It's not a route, it's a direction, and everyone she cares about is somewhere along it. The letter is up the road, the friend is over the fell, the brother is coming back down it whenever he's coming, so going out to the road, in the dark, in a cloak, isn't restlessness exactly. It's more like putting your ear to the only channel there is. Now, the door. It's low and heavy, and it sticks a little in wet weather. There's a latch that has to be lifted with a thumb, and it makes a particular sound. And if you'd lived here, you'd know that sound the way you know a voice. She lifts it. The cold comes in around her ankles. Behind her, the fire is still deciding whether to draw properly, and Molly is somewhere in the back with her sleeves up, and the bread is either in or not in. Outside, there's just the road. Grey, between the walls, wet, going up towards Rydale one way, and down towards the lake the other. Cloud sitting on silver. How with the shape of rain in it. A cart somewhere out of sight, and the water making its small perpetual noise over the stones and thrushes and the stone chats, and the day not asking a single thing of her. She pulls the door to. She doesn't look back at it. There's nothing in her pocket, and nobody is expecting her anywhere or will notice if she's late. The road takes her without any ceremony at all. That's how every one of these walks begins. A latch, a sky, and out. Most of the walking has a reason attached to it, and the reason is usually small. Eggs, sticks, bread, a letter. Somebody has to go and get the thing, and going and getting it means legs, so the day arranges itself around a series of small journeys that we would not think of as journeys at all. You don't order anything. You don't have anything delivered apart from the coal. If it isn't in this house, it's up the road, and you're the one who goes. The road to Ambleside is about 4.5 miles from her door. That's the number to hold on to tonight, because almost everything in this chapter hangs off it. 4.5 miles out, 4.5 miles back. Call it 3 hours if you don't stop, and she always stops. Along the way it goes by the water, past Rydale, under Loughrigg, over a set of stepping stones down where the lake ends if you want the short way, and the water's low enough to let you have it. At the far end of it there's the post, and the post is the whole nervous system of her life, so it's worth being clear about what it was. Letters came into Ambleside and sat there. Nobody brought them out to Grasmere. If a letter was waiting for you, it waited, and it went on waiting until you walked in and asked. There's no notification. There's no way of knowing from your own doorway whether the thing you've been aching for all week is sitting in a box 4.5 miles away or hasn't been written yet. And it runs the other way too, which is the half we forget. The letters she sends have to be walked in and left, and then they go south at the speed of horses and men, and then they sit in somebody else's town waiting for somebody else to have a spare morning. So a question, and its answer, between Grasmere and London is a matter of weeks. You can't check. You can't chase it. You write the thing, you carry it 4.5 miles, you hand it over, and then you let go of it entirely, which is a skill nobody now is required to have. Her letter-writing days are a kind of quiet industry. There's an evening where she works through a whole stack of them in one sitting. One to a friend, one to Coleridge, one to another Lloyd, one to William. And then the whole bundle needs a pair of legs to get anywhere at all. Sometimes the legs are hers. Sometimes she puts them in someone else's hand. Either way, there's a walk at the end of every letter written in that house, and everybody in it knows that, and it's never once remarked on as a burden. Now sit with that for a moment, because I don't think it's easy to feel from where we are. Everyone she loves is far away and moving. Her brother's off south for weeks. A friend's ill in another county. The whole of her heart is scattered across England, and the only channel between her and any of it is a piece of paper that has to be walked to. Not walked to when convenient. Walked to, in the rain, both ways, on the chance. And she goes, constantly. The entries are thick with it. Walked to Ambleside with letters. Walked to Ambleside for letters. Went to Ambleside after tea. Some of these are her carrying letters out to be sent. Some are her going in to see if anything's arrived. Very often it's both, and the walk is 9 miles round for a piece of paper that may or may not exist. Here's my favourite of them, and I want to tell it slowly because it's perfect. One morning she goes. 4.5 miles into Ambleside in the morning, on a fine enough day, and she gets there, and she's told that the post doesn't come in until the evening. She'd forgotten, that's all. She simply forgot which end of the day it arrives, and she has walked half a morning for nothing. She writes down that she was grieved when they told her. That's her word. Grieved. Not annoyed, not put out. Grieved. Standing in the street of a small town with 9 wasted miles either side of her. And then she does the thing that undoes me every time. She walks the 4.5 miles home again, and she resolves to go back, which she does. That evening, she goes again. So on that one ordinary day, for one letter that might be there, she covers something close to 18 miles on her own 2 feet, in a wool cloak, on Stony Road, and the whole business gets about 1.5 lines in the journal. There's no complaint in it. She doesn't tell you it was hard, because it wasn't hard, particularly. It was just what you did if you wanted the letter. I keep trying to find the thing in my own life that this maps onto, and I can't. Quite. The closest I get is the small pull we all feel to check for a message, that little reach of the hand towards the pocket. It's the same appetite exactly. Is there anything for me? Has anyone thought of me today? Is there news? Ours is answered in half a second and costs nothing, and so the appetite has become a twitch we barely notice. Hers cost a morning of walking and could come back empty. Same hunger, wildly different price, and I honestly don't know which of us is better off, so I'll just leave the two of them sitting side by side. Some evenings she doesn't wait at all. She takes a letter of Coleridge's that has to go, and she sets off in the dark after tea round by Loughrigg and Clappersgate, and she meets the post right at the turnpike gate. Meets him, as in the actual man carrying the actual bag along the actual road. He stops and tells her what he's got. 2 letters, he says, but neither of them is for her, and this is the part I love. Having got her answer, and it being a disappointing one, she isn't in any hurry now. So she goes round again by Clapper's Gate. She crosses back over the stepping stones down where the lake ends. She sits there a good while watching the waves hurry in, listening to the sound they make coming, which she calls regularly irregular. And that's such a precise little thing to notice about water that I've thought about it for days. The errand's failed. So the walk simply becomes a walk, and the evening gets longer, and she goes home slowly. Do you see what happened there? The reason for going out was never really load-bearing. It was the excuse the day needed. When the excuse collapsed, she didn't turn round and trudge home defeated. She took the long way because she was out, and being out was the point all along, and the letter was only the shape the wanting to be out had taken that evening. There are other days when she walks out to meet the post rather than wait for it. The post's not come in, so off she goes towards Windermere along the road, and she catches him out there and gets it that way. Think about that as a piece of behaviour. She's walking towards her own news. If it were coming by post now, she'd sit down. Back then, if it's coming and you can't bear it, you go and meet it, and each mile you cover is a mile the news doesn't have to. And sometimes she doesn't go herself because there's a whole quiet traffic of other people's legs to be borrowed. A neighbour's lad is going for letters, and she catches him just as he sets off. Catches him, so she must have seen him from the door and gone out after him. And he comes back with 1 letter from her brother and 12 newspapers. 12. A boy walking 9 miles with the world's news under his arm. On another day, the little boy carries their letters over to Ambleside. On another, it's her brother John who takes them. 12 newspapers is worth pausing on, by the way. The papers came in a heap like that because they'd been piling up somewhere waiting for someone to fetch them. So the news of the country arrives at that cottage not as a trickle but as a delivery, a fortnight of the world all at once to be read through by the fire while the fire lasts. Nothing is current. Everything's a little bit old by the time it gets to you, and everybody knows it's a little bit old, and so nobody is standing in the road demanding to know what's happening this minute. The world happens, and then some weeks later it reaches you, and you find out about it sitting down. I want to stop on that boy for a second. He has no name in the pages. He's Mr. Oliph's lad, and he's going for letters, and that's the whole of him. He exists in that book for 1 clause, and then he's gone forever. But he made that walk. 9 miles, in all weathers, for coppers, and the only reason we know anything at all about letters arriving at that cottage is that a boy's legs brought them there. History keeps almost none of the people who carried things. It's a bit like the coal, which turns up at the door by cart, brought by Thomas Ashburner from Keswick. And one day she notes it's the 8th cartload since the 17th of May, which tells you she was counting, and tells you nothing at all about how many times Ashburner made that road. The errands that aren't letters are humbler still, and they're my favourite kind. To the bakers, to the blacksmiths, into the little valley for eggs, out for sticks, and then home again carrying great heavy loads of them, which is the detail that always brings me up short, because we picture the walking and forget that half the time she's coming back with her arms full, once she gets such a load of plants that she has to leave the basket standing in the road and have Molly go down and fetch it. The road, in that story, is a thing you can just put a basket down on and come back to. The sticks are their own small economy, and I've come to think they might be the purest errand walk of all. There's no shop involved and no money changes hands. You go into the wood, you gather what the wind has already taken down and you bring it back on your body. Some evenings that's the whole outing, into the further wood, where the ground is green with moss and bramble, and the oaks go up tall and straight with no branches for the first while. Gather what's fallen, carry it home under a starry sky with the cold coming down. Fuel, warmth, and a 2-hour walk, all in the same movement. She never separates them out. Why would she? And the entry for one of those evenings, walk to the blacksmith's and then the baker's, ends with 3 words that I've never been able to stop thinking about. Not a complaint, not a joke either, just a verdict, set down plainly at the end of the day the way you'd note the temperature. An uninteresting evening, she wrote that. She went out in the dark, on a small dull errand to 2 of the least romantic buildings in the village, came home, sat down, and told the page it had been uninteresting. She'd walked, in the dark, to see a man about iron and a man about bread, and there was nothing in it, and she said so. Then she wrote the next day's entry, and the next, and kept going for years. Nobody was reading this. She wasn't being paid. There was no audience whatsoever, and she still bothered to record a dull walk to the blacksmith's. There's something in that I want to hold up gently, because it's more or less the whole spirit of what we do here. She didn't only write down the good ones, She wrote down the ordinary ones, and the failed ones, and the ones where the post wasn't in and the sky was grey and nothing happened at all. And the odd thing, the thing she couldn't have known, is that 200 years later it's the uninteresting evening that survives. The dull walk to the baker's is the one that reaches across and touches you. Not because it was interesting, because it was true, and because she thought it was worth the ink even when it wasn't worth anything else. The days when the errand can't happen have their own texture too. Ashburner can't go to Keswick, the weather, or the horse, or something unrecorded. And so whatever was coming from Keswick doesn't come, and that's that. The stepping stones go under when the water's up, and then the short way to Ambleside simply isn't there anymore, and you go round. Nothing is guaranteed to arrive. The whole system runs on legs and hooves and weather, and any one of the three can simply decline. Which produces a way of waiting that I think we've entirely lost. Not impatient waiting. Waiting as a permanent condition, a low background hum of maybe today. She writes one evening, having come in cold with her face lit up from the fire, that it's 9 o'clock and she'll go to bed now, and then adds one small line on the end all by itself, wishing she had a letter from William. That's the whole entry. Fire, 9 o'clock, bed, and a wish. She'll get up tomorrow, and it will still be maybe today, and if the wanting gets bad enough she'll put her cloak on and walk 9 miles into it. So when I say the walking had a reason attached, I want to be careful about what I mean. Yes, the letter, the eggs, the loaf. But the reason isn't why she's walking, not really. Watch what she does when the reason evaporates. She goes round by Clappersgate. She sits down by the water and listens to it come in. She stands still to look at the ashes coming into leaf and can tell, from where she's standing, exactly which trees on the higher ground are still bare. The errand is the door opener. It's the thing that makes going out unarguable, so that nobody, including her, has to justify the 4 hours. She's not going for a walk, which would be an indulgence. She's going for the post, and in between the door and the post there are 4.5 miles of water and light and roadside and weather, and those are hers, and they come free with the letter. On the way back there's a field she's fond of, and she turns aside into it, and that's not on the way to anything. It's just hers. She'll stand in it with the air still and the lake flat and one cottage light burning somewhere down the vale, and stay until she can hardly make herself leave. No errand asked for that. The errand got her as far as the gate, and then she wandered off it, the way you'd wander off a sentence. There's a shape to the way she comes back on these days too. She turns at the bottom of the vale where the road bends and Grasmere lies down there under its fells, and it's this that gets her, over and over, the coming into sight of the valley from above. The roof small and dark down there, the water holding what's left of the light, and the whole of it waiting for her to walk down into it. That's 4 miles of tired legs and no letter in her pocket, and the entry for the day will still say it did her good. The post office closes. The baker sells out. The stepping stones flood. The lad is already gone before she reaches the gate, and she walks home anyway in the last of the light with nothing in her hands. She walks in through the door with cold hands and hangs the cloak on its nail, and the fire is doing whatever the fire is doing, and she sits down and writes the day out. The errand gets one clause, the road gets the rest. It was never about the letter. Here's what I think slowness does to a person, and I want to put it plainly before we go out again, because everything in this chapter comes from it. If you never move faster than your own legs, the world arrives at your eyes at a speed your eyes can work with. Nothing streams past, nothing blurs at the edges. A tree stays in your field of vision for 4 or 5 minutes as you come up to it, and then it stays there again on the way home, and then again tomorrow. And it turns out that a mind given that much time will start doing something extraordinary with it. It'll start noticing. Not noticing in the way we mean when we tell each other to be present. Something much stranger and more specific than that. Watch what she does with one tree. They walk into Easdale on a rainy morning before dinner. The coppices are brown, and the oaks are heavy with leaf, and they come round to a particular corner where there's a birch. And they stop. Not for a moment. She says they stood a long time and looked at it. The wind was in the thin twigs at the top of it, and the twigs were giving way to the wind, this way and that's what they stood and watched. 2 adults, in the rain, before their dinner, watching the small end of a birch tree move. I don't have a device that can give me that. There's no version of my afternoon in which that happens, and I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to turn this into a scolding. Put your phone down, look at a tree. And that's not what I mean at all, that's cheap. What I mean is that she isn't doing anything virtuous. She's not practicing anything. She simply has hours and a birch, and the birch is genuinely more interesting than anything else on offer, because there isn't anything else on offer. The attention isn't a discipline. It's just what fills the space when nothing else is competing for it. And the eyes get very good. That's the thing that keeps surprising me. She can tell you, standing in one spot, which ashes down in the valley are nearly in full leaf, and which ones on the higher ground are still bare, and that's not a poetic flourish, that's a report. She's watching the season climb the hillside a few feet a week. Nobody told her to. There's no purpose to the knowledge. She just has it, the way you'd have the shape of a friend's handwriting. The colours are where she really goes to work, and the autumn entries read like somebody taking inventory of a paint box. Walking through the little wood by the water before tea, watching the leaves come on, the oaks dark green with their yellow coming through, the birches mostly still green, and then the ones down near the water going yellowish first, because of course the water changes them. The sycamore gone crimson, and tufted with crimson. The coppices are lovely brown, and the beeches in another wood in another year, brown-red at the tops, or crimson depending on the light and the day and how she felt about it. She's not painting, let's be clear about that. She has no plan to make anything out of this. She's coming home from a walk and writing down what colour things were, for nobody, and the reason she's writing it down is that it happened and it was worth it. That's the whole motive. Now the moss. If you want to know what her eyes were like, look at what she does with moss, because moss is the thing that nobody looks at. It's the surface everything else stands on, and there's an entry, a spring one, warm, the day full of the hum of insects and what she calls that noiseless noise that lives in the summer air, which is such an exact way of putting it that I've stolen it about 4 times already, and in the middle of all that she writes down as its own small fact. Scarlet flowers of moss. Scarlet flowers of moss. She's got her eye an inch off the ground. Those little red-tipped stalks that moss sends up, that you'd have to be knelt down and looking to see, and she's put them in the same paragraph as the sea and the mountains and the villages marked out by their beds of smoke. No hierarchy at all. The moss and the mountain get the same weight, because on that day walking they arrived at her eye with the same weight. And on another walk, in another wood, the oaks are thick with feathery moss the colour of the sea, so that the trees look like a grove that hasn't been stripped of its leaves at all. Then she looks at the little cups the moss makes. You'll know them if you've ever really looked, the tiny pale goblets on their stems, and she decides that they do better than acorns for fairies to drink out of. That's the entry. A grown woman walking home, quietly upgrading the fairy tableware. I love that more than I can properly justify. It's not important. It doesn't tell us anything about the past. It's just a person having a small private thought on a road and thinking it worth keeping. And it's precisely the kind of thought that only turns up in a head that's been walking for 2 hours with nothing to do. She notices what animals do to things too, which is a particular kind of seeing. The moss rubbed off the wooden palings where the sheep have been leaning against them, and locks of wool left behind in the splinters, and the red marks off the sheep's backs printed onto the wood. You have to stop at a fence for that. You have to stand there long enough to work out what's been happening at this fence, over months, when nobody was watching. That's not looking at scenery. That's reading. And then there's the day with the daffodils, which I've been saving, and which is the best short account of walking eyes I know. It's worth having the shape of the day first, though, because the flowers are famous and the day isn't, and the day is where the seeing really happens. Everybody has the flowers. Nobody has the cows, or the wind, or the sitting down behind a bush to get out of it. They set off after dinner from a friend's house up beside a bigger lake further north. It's a threatening, misty morning, mild but with something in it. The friend comes a little way and then turns back, which turns out to be the sensible choice, because the wind is furious. So furious that they very nearly give the whole thing up and go home. She says it seized her breath, which is exactly what a headwind off open water does to a person. So they shelter. And this is the rhythm of the walk. And it's not a rhythm we have anymore. They rest in a big boathouse. Then they get in behind a furze bush and rest there. Then they rest again in a lane. They're not covering ground. They're moving between shelters, in a gale, beside a rough grey lake, stopping every time the wind gets to be too much, and looking at whatever happens to be in front of them while they wait for it to ease. There's a plough going in a field, people working, the hawthorns black and green, The birches showing a little green here and there, but still more purple than anything in the twigs. They're going along the shore that whole windy day, cold enough that they'd got over into a field earlier to get round some cows. There are primroses on the roadside, wood sorrel, the anemone, violets with no scent to them, a strawberry flower, and that little starry yellow thing that a friend of theirs calls pilewort, which is a name she just accepts and uses because that's the name it has in her life. They come into the woods past the park and they see a few daffodils close down by the water. A few. And they stand there and work out a small theory about it. That the water must have floated the seeds in and dropped them there, and a little colony has come up out of that. Lovely. Then they walk on, and there are more, and then more again. And then, under the boughs, they see what they're really looking at. A belt of them, running along the shore. And she reaches for a way to say how wide it is and lands on this, about as broad across as a country turnpike road, which is the most her sentence I've ever read. She measures a band of wildflowers in units of road, because road is what she knows, because road is what her life is made of. Then she says it flatly, that she'd never in her life seen daffodils as beautiful as these, and she gets down into the detail of it, how they'd come up among the mossy stones and some of them had laid their heads on the stones, which is a thing you can only say if you're close enough to see individual flowers resting on individual rocks, in the wind, and you thought that was worth the ink. The others weren't resting at all. They were tossing and reeling about, and she thought they looked as though they were laughing at the wind that was coming at them over the water, never still, never the same, twice. And then, this is the part that finishes me. She walks on. The bays are stormy. She can hear the waves at different distances out in the middle like the sea. Everything's grey and cheerless, so they put their heads down and face into it, and they get to an inn, and a young woman is kind to her and the landlady is sour, which she says is just her way. William gets a good fire and finds some odd books piled up in the corner by the window. They share a glass of rum, warm, with water in it, and wish a friend of theirs was there too. Then it rains and blows and they go to bed. That's where the daffodils live. In between a furze bush and a glass of rum, on a bad day, on the way to somewhere else. And in the middle of that walk she writes 5 words that explain her entire eye better than any of the descriptions do. We rested again and again. She saw them because she was tired and stopping and had nowhere to be. Going past at any speed at all, they'd have been a yellow smear. The pillowed heads and the laughing and the whole long shifting road of them would simply not exist in the language. Now, I want to sit here for a moment, because there's something in this that I keep turning over and haven't got to the bottom of. That belt of daffodils has been famous for 200 years. It got turned into the most quoted thing about this whole landscape, and the version everybody knows is not this one. It's tidier and grander, and it comes out of a man's head sometime afterwards. Her version is the one that was there. Hers has the cows in it, and the getting into the field to avoid them, and the wrong little theory about the seeds, and the exact width in units of turnpike. And I don't want to make a quarrel out of it, because there wasn't one. I just think it's worth knowing that the seeing came first, and that it was done on foot, by someone who'd walked that day like she walked every other day. There's a spring day at home when she comes on that same pilewort again, spread out through the grass, and she counts it as 1,000 shiny stars lying on the ground. The primroses are in with it, and the last few daffodils going over. And in the same breath she notes that the well they'd cleaned out the night before is still a muddy little pond, though at least it's full of water now. 1,000 stars and a muddy well side by side in the same tone of voice. She doesn't rank them. That's the part I can't get over. The flatness of it. The way the glorious thing and the dull thing get the same amount of care because on that day walking, they arrived at her eye with the same weight. The light does things she catches too. There's a morning up where the valley ends when everything lines up at once. The autumn hills gone yellow and wrapped in sun, mist hanging over them in patches, the trees green and yellow underneath, and behind the whole arrangement the highest tops with snow on them already. She stands there and takes the entire thing in as one image, layered top to bottom. That's a composition. Nobody taught her to see like that. And there's an evening on the water where the lake goes so still in places that the unruffled patches sit there among the ruffled ones like green islands, islands of calm with shapes to them. I've been on flat water and never once seen that, and now I can't unsee it, which is what happens when somebody hands you their eye. Even the wind gets seen, which sounds impossible. Sitting in a thick part of a wood gathering sticks, she notices that the near trees are dead still right up to their top branches, but the ones at the edge of the wood are moving all the time, and then a breeze comes and she can see its path. See the actual line of it, marked out by which trees are moving, and she watches it come across the wood until it arrives at the exact spot where they're sitting. It comes to them. She tracks the wind the way you'd track a person crossing a field. I've thought about that entry more than almost any other, because that's not a thing you can see quickly. To watch a breeze cross a wood, you have to have been sitting in that wood for a long while doing nothing, in a body that isn't expecting anything to happen. The walking earns that. 4 hours of legs and then 20 minutes on the ground in a wood, and the wind comes to you. The small animals come in the same way. She's in a reverie on a path, gone off somewhere in her head, and she's brought back by a noise like small bare feet in water, and she looks up, and it's a lamb. It comes closer. It keeps coming, right up to her, and looks at her the way animals do when they're deciding what you are, and stands there. That's the entry. She was daydreaming, a lamb came to examine her, and she wrote it down. And on a mild moonlit night, walking home, glowworms everywhere. Another night, up on the hilltop above Rydale, only 6 of them, and she counts. 6 glowworms shining faintly. Not many, not spectacular. 6 faintly, and it's in the book. That counting is the thing in the end. Not the daffodils, the 6. Anybody would write down a shoreful of daffodils, you'd be a fool not to. It takes a very particular kind of life to write down 6 faint glowworms on a hill on an ordinary evening. And I don't think she had that life because she was a special person, though she was. I think she had it because she walked every day at 3 miles an hour, past the same fields, and the world had no choice but to give itself to her in that much detail. We gave that up for something, and mostly I think we gave it up for good reasons, and I wouldn't want to walk to Ambleside for my post. But we gave it up. Whatever it is that lets you see the scarlet on the moss, and the wind's path across a wood, and which ashes on the high ground are still bare, it doesn't survive being carried at speed. It only comes to a body moving slowly, with nowhere in particular to be. And the birch at the corner is still going this way and that in the thin light of a wet morning, and there's nobody at all watching it now. They're still standing there. They're in no hurry at all. There's an entry I'd like to put in front of you first because it does the work of this whole chapter in about 11 words. They walk a friend home after dinner. It rains very hard. And then she writes that Rydale was extremely wild and that they had a fine walk. Read that again. It rained very hard, therefore the walk was fine. Not despite. There's no despite anywhere in the sentence. The rain came down, the water went wild, and the 2 things sit in her page as a single good evening, and then they came in and sat quietly by the fire and she got on with some work. I've been trying to find the mental move that makes that possible, and I think I've got it, and it's simpler than I wanted it to be. If you can't avoid weather, you stop having opinions about it. That's all. She has no waterproof, nothing to shelter under between here and there, and no way of getting anywhere at all except by going through whatever the sky happens to be doing, so the sky stops being an obstacle and starts being the medium. It's just the stuff the day is made of. You don't complain about the air. Now what it means in practice. She's wearing wool, and wool that's got properly wet is heavy. It holds the water in it and it goes cold against you, and it stays that way. There's nothing to change into halfway. There's nothing on her head that'll keep the rain off her neck. 4 miles from home in a downpour, you're 4 miles from being dry and no closer, and the only cure is legs. And here's the thing she does with that. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. One Sunday they go over to Keswick, which is a good long walk over the pass, and the whole record of it is that they arrived wet to the skin. That's the entry. Wet to the skin, full stop. And then the next day somebody's off to another village and life goes on. No account of how miserable it was. No mention of drying out. She got soaked walking about 13 miles and thought it worth exactly 6 words. It's worth knowing what that road was underneath her too, because she tells us that as well, in the flattest way imaginable. The road's very dirty. That's her phrase, and it turns up again and again, and dirty means what it means. A track of earth and stone with carts through it and animals on it, turned to a paste by 3 days of the rain, standing in the ruts, coming up over the edge of a shoe. That's the surface she's covering 13 miles of, in the dark some nights, in a long cloak that's dragging the wet up off the ground into itself, and the weather doesn't stop at the door either, which is the part I keep forgetting. There's a night when the rain comes into her brother's room and disturbs him in his bed, because the night was a very wet one, and the roof was only a roof, so there's no sealed place. The house is a slightly drier bit of the same weather, and everybody in it knows that, and I think that changes something in the mind. If indoors is only ever a matter of degree, then going outdoors isn't crossing a line. It's just moving to a wetter part of the world you were already in. I want to sit in that for a second, because I think it's easy to admire it in the wrong way. To make her into some hardy figure who didn't feel the cold. She felt the cold. She writes about coming in with her face burning red from the fire, about being tired to death, about the wind taking her breath away. She wasn't made of different material, she just had nowhere to put the complaint, because the complaint had no lever to pull. Nobody was going to come and get her, and I think a grievance you can't act on eventually stops forming. The wind is the one that gets the best writing out of her, and I've come to think she was slightly in love with it. There's a February afternoon when they set off a couple of hours before dinner to walk to a neighbour's, and the wind is blowing so keen into their faces that they turn aside into the wood for a bit of cover. That's the phrase she uses, the covert of the wood, as though the wood were a place you go inside, which of course it is. And once they're in there, she says they had a warm shelter, which is a beautiful thing to say about a stand of trees in February. And then, being in the wood already, they pick up an armful of big rotten boughs that the wind had brought down the night before and carry them home. Do you see the whole economy of that? The wind is why they're in the wood, and the wind is why there's wood to take home, and the wood they take home is what makes the fire they'll dry themselves at. The weather knocks the fuel out of the trees for you, and then makes you cold enough to want it. It's all one system, and she's inside it, not out on the edge of it looking at a forecast. And there's a friend who walks over the fells to their house one day for no reason, except that his own chimney is smoking too badly to sit under, and it's a day of very high wind, and he comes anyway and stops the night. Think about what that means as a decision. His house is unpleasant, so he walks miles across open country in a gale to a different house. That's the era in one gesture. There's no other way to change your situation. Your legs are the only lever you've got, and the weather isn't a factor in whether you pull it, because the weather is never not there. The hollies are the other piece of furniture in this life, and I don't think I properly understood hollies until I read these pages. A holly in winter is a solid green room. Everything else has dropped its leaves and gone to sticks, and the holly is still standing there full and dense and dark, and so the holly is where you get in when the sky opens, which they do, over and over. A cold windy morning, they walk friends half of the way home, and coming back a hail shower catches them, and they get under the hollies and wait it out. That's the entry, and it would be a perfectly ordinary entry, except for the line she puts on the end of it. The withered leaves, she says, were dancing about with the hailstones. I've read that a lot of times now. She's standing under a holly in hail, with the hard little stones bouncing off the ground and knocking about among the dead leaves lying there, and the leaves are getting flicked up and skittering. And what she sees isn't a mess or a nuisance, it's a dance. Two dead things, the old leaf and the frozen water, having a moment together on the floor of a wood while she waits out a shower. And her brother stood there in the same hail and went home and wrote up the storm. That's what the household did with bad weather. They went out in it, sheltered under a tree, watched the rubbish on the ground jump about, and then made something out of it. Nobody in that cottage ever seems to have thought of a storm as a cancelled plan. There's an evening when they set out at 5:30 to walk over to a friend's, and a violent storm comes down on them in the wood, and again it's the hollies they get under and wait. But the bit that stays with me is what she noticed on the way out before it broke. The moon was up and enormous, with the sky all scattered over with cloud, and then the cloud closed in, and what it did, she says, was shrink the moon's dimensions without ever hiding her. That's what she thought about walking into a storm at dusk. Not the storm, the way the cloud made the moon smaller without hiding it. Which is exactly right, by the way, and I'd never once noticed it, and now I look for it. Then there's the wood that's half in the wind and half not, which might be my favourite weather entry in the whole book. A day of very high wind. A friend comes over to their house to get away from the smoke in his own, and they go out and sit under the trees in a gale, because that's a reasonable thing to do. And she notices that half the wood is perfectly still. The other half, behind them, is making an enormous noise. So they're sitting inside a boundary. There's a line running through that wood with roaring on one side of it and silence on the other, and they're on the quiet side of it, listening. And the trees around them, the still ones, are bowing their heads gently, as if they were listening to the wind, not being blown by it, listening to it. Then she looks at the hollies deeper in and sees that they aren't moving at all. The blast comes through, and the hollies don't stir, except that when it really gets in among them, their leaves rattle, one against another, a small dry noise inside all that roaring. I don't have anywhere to go with that. I just wanted you to have it. A woman sitting in half a wood in a gale, listening to the quiet half, watching still trees nod as if they were paying attention. And on that same walk they'd have gone right past and in on the road with the finest name I've come across in any of this. The Castle of Comfort. That's where the hail hit them. I'd like to think they got inside it, and I don't know that they did, and she doesn't say. But I love that on the road, between one wet place and another, there was a building called the Castle of Comfort, sitting there in the rain, and that a woman walking past it in a hailstorm didn't think the name worth remarking on at all. Rain does a thing to that country that she catches better than anyone. When the shower goes over and the sun comes back, everything's hung with water, and the whole landscape starts throwing light. She calls them diamond drops, which sounds like the tritest phrase in English until you've stood in it, and then it's simply the correct description. The hollies come up shining in big, broad patches, because a holly leaf is polished and holds a bead of water like nothing else, and the road down to the village glitters so hard she says it looked like another stream running alongside the real one. The road became a river of light. That's what 4 hours of rain gives you, if you're outside at the end of it, which she always was. Because if you were only ever going to go out on the good days, you'd have missed this, since this only exists on the bad ones. You can't get the glitter without the soaking. The one is made of the other, the same water, 20 minutes apart, and then the sky afterwards. There's a night when a violent burst of hail and rain catches them out on the road, and when it finally stops she stands there and watches the whole of the heavens in perpetual motion. The moon coming out half-veiled, then going in behind the heavy cloud, then out again, and the stars moving the whole time and the roads very dirty underfoot. That last bit is so her. The stars are moving and the roads are muddy and both go in the book. The lake gets weather too, and she reads it the way you'd read someone's face. Cold showers with hail in them all afternoon, and then, at 5:30, after all that heavy rain has gone through, the water simply becomes calm. Beautiful, she says. The rain stopped and the lake put itself back together, and she was there for it, because she'd been out in the hail an hour earlier. That's the deal when you think about it. There's no version where you get the lake going calm at 5:30 and don't get the hail at 4. They're the same afternoon. We've built ourselves a life where we can take the one and refuse the other, where we look out at the rain and stay in, and go out later when it's nice, and we think of that as an improvement. And mostly it is. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that being cold and wet for 3 hours is good for the soul. But she got something out of the arrangement that we've priced ourselves out of, and it's this. Nothing about her day was conditional. She never once had to decide whether the weather was good enough. The question wasn't on the table. She put her cloak on and opened the door and went, and the day gave her what it had. Hail, or diamond drops, or a wood with a wind boundary running through it, or the moon getting smaller without going away. And she took all of it, because taking all of it was the only offer. I think that's what I envy, if I'm honest. Not the wetness, the absence of the decision. There's a tremendous wind one day, and the snow comes off the high fell sideways, like smoke pouring off the top of it, and she stands somewhere in all that and watches it happen. There's another evening, a fine solemn one she calls it, when the wind is blowing fierce off the island and the mountains have gone completely black over Grasmere while they're still bright over at Rydale. The same range, the same hour, 2 different weathers hanging on it. And she and her brother go round to Rydale's far side and sit themselves down and look at that for a long time, in the wind, in the evening, because it was worth looking at. They didn't go inside to look at it out of a window. There was no window that faced it. You went to where the thing was, or you didn't have it. And I'll tell you what I think the real cost was, since I've been going on about what she gained. It's the wool. A soaked wool cloak on a cold body for 2 hours is not a poetic experience. It's a weight on the shoulders and a cold place at the small of the back and a smell. Wet wool has a smell, sheepish and heavy, and she'd have carried that home with her and hung it up and it would still have been damp in the morning. She never says any of this. I'm putting it in because I don't want to sell you a soft version of it. She was often cold and often wet, and there was nothing charming about the wool, and she went out the next day regardless, and that's the actual shape of it. The cloak gets heavier as it soaks. The hair goes flat and cold against the neck. Somewhere ahead there's a door, and behind it a fire that smokes, and a kettle, and a chair. And I keep thinking about how she'd have felt walking into that. Not relief exactly, because relief needs a threat, and the rain isn't a threat, it's just the rain. Something simpler, the way a cold hand feels when it comes near heat, and the smell of the wool starting to steam. and the particular good silence of a person who has been out for 4 hours sitting down at last with nothing left to do about anything. That hasn't changed at all in 200 years. You felt it. It's the best thing about being cold, and you can't have it without the cold. She's not walking home to get out of the rain. She's just walking home, and the rain happens to be what's falling on her while she does it. Snow doesn't stop it either. I want to say that plainly at the start because I think we all half expect that somewhere in these pages there'll be a winter where she gives up and stays by the fire for a fortnight, and there isn't one. Snow just changes what the road is made of. Here's the day I keep going back to. A deep snow has come down overnight. Deep, she says, right across the ground. Her brother and a friend set off over the hills to a neighbour's village, and then her brother comes back, and the two of them go out again, through the wood, to fetch some eggs. Eggs! There's a deep snow lying on the ground, and the two of them walk out into the wood for eggs. Nobody in that house said, let's leave the eggs till Thursday and have something else. But look what they got for it. The sun came out bright and clear over all that white, and they got in among the thick middle of the wood, and she found something there she'd never have found on a mild day. A deep stillness, not quiet, stillness, which is a different thing, and she knew the difference. The whole wood, muffled, with the snow packing the sound down into the ground. And in that stillness there were exactly 3 sounds, and she counted them off. The first was the snow itself, dropping off the holly boughs now and then as the sun got at it. That soft, irregular thump you get when a load slides off a branch and lands. The second was water, just water, somewhere, going on the way water does regardless of the season. And the third was a robin, singing at intervals over on the southern edge of the wood, on the outskirts of it where the light was. That's the whole inventory. Snow off the hollies, water, and one bird at the far edge, coming and going. 3 things, in a whole wood, on a bright day, and she got them all and put them in order. And I want you to hear the first of those properly, because it's the sound of the chapter. Snow coming off a holly isn't like snow coming off anything else. A holly holds its load on all those stiff glossy leaves until the sun works underneath it, and then the whole lot lets go at once and comes down through the branches in a rush, and hits the ground with a soft, heavy sound that's over before you've turned your head. And then nothing. And then, a few minutes later, another one, somewhere else in the wood, from a tree you weren't looking at. That's what she means by the stillness being undisturbed except for that. The sound doesn't break the quiet. It measures it. I've read that entry more times than I can tell you, and I still can't quite believe someone wrote it down on the way back from getting eggs. Because that's what it is. That's not a nature essay. She went for eggs, and on the way she noticed that a wood after snow has 3 sounds in it, and she came home and put it in the book between the eggs and whatever happened next. And she notices one more thing before they leave, which is the thing that finishes me. Low down where the trunks meet the ground, right at the roots, the snow hasn't taken. There are patches of bright green moss still bare, still showing, and the little birds are down on them. Of course they are. It's the one uncovered ground in the whole wood. So the whole population of small birds is gathered at the base of the trunks, on the green, in a white world, because that's where the food is. Nobody told her that. There was no one to tell her. She worked it out by standing still in the cold in deep snow, looking at the bottoms of trees for long enough to see what was going on down there. That's the eye again. It doesn't switch off because it's January. The hollies get her again, as they always do. Their branches are hanging down under the weight of the snow, bowed with it, and yet the red berries are still coming through, and the glossy green underneath is still coming through. White load, red berries, dark shine. And beside them the oaks, which have no leaves at all, have gone thick. The bare branches thickened by the snow, she says, which is exactly what happens, and I'd never had a word for it. Snow puts weight on a naked tree and the whole shape of it fattens. That's what a walk in deep snow was for. Not fitness, not achievement. Eggs, and the 3 sounds, and the thickened oaks, and the other end of it, the going out of winter, gets the same treatment. After a run of wet, dark days, the sun comes back and she says the country seems more populous, that it peoples itself out there in the sunbeams, which is a strange and lovely way to put it, as though warmth summoned everybody out of the ground at once. The garden's doing its small imitation of spring. There's a hepatica out, purple and starred, opening itself right out into the sun. And the snowdrops are up in a clump. She watches those snowdrops closely enough to describe how they change. They come up with their heads held upright, ribbed with green, closed like a bud. Then, when they open out properly, they hang their heads down instead, and their stems go on slowly lengthening underneath them. That's not a glance. That's somebody who has walked past the same clump every day for a fortnight and watched a flower change its posture. There's one day, where the snow wins, and I love it more than any of the others. A fine, clear morning with snow lying everywhere. She and a friend set off towards Rydale, taking the upper road, which is the higher way round, and they can't get through. She writes it without any drama at all. They were obliged to turn round on account of the snow. Turned back. That's the whole failure, recorded in half a line. And then, the very next thing she puts on the page, with nothing between them at all, walked by moonlight, same day. They came home defeated in the morning and went out again after dark. It's the funniest thing in the whole journal to me, and she has absolutely no idea it's funny. The snow beat the upper road, so they took the night instead. And then the line after that, the next morning, a thaw came in the night, and by daylight every bit of it had gone. All of it. The thing that had turned them back had simply removed itself while they slept. That's winter in that country. It isn't a season so much as a series of moods, and you can be defeated by a road on Sunday and walk it easily on Monday, and the only way to know which one you're in is to go out and find out. I think that's part of why they went out at all, every single day, in everything. Because there was no forecast. There was no way of knowing what the day held except by walking into it. If you waited to be told the conditions were good, you'd wait forever, since nobody was ever going to tell you anything. The information and the walk were the same object. Now here's the part that surprised me most, and I want to give it room. They go out to look at snow, on purpose, for no reason at all. There's an evening when a friend arrives just as they're finishing dinner, and after tea the three of them walk out in the dark under the moon to go and look at Langdale under its snow. That's the stated object of the outing. Go and see the snow on the mountains at night, in the cold. It's slippery underfoot the whole way. She says so, and then she says the walk was exceedingly pleasant. And when they got home they sat up talking until 1:30 in the morning. Look at what's in that entry. Cold, slippery, dark, miles of it. And she describes the far peaks like she's describing acquaintances. The Pikes weren't up to much that night, but the old man was very expressive. Expressive. She's talking about the face of a mountain across a valley lit by moonlight over snow, and she's saying it had something to say for itself that evening. That's a night out. That's the entertainment. There's nothing to see, no event, nobody performing. The event is that there's snow on a hill 4 miles away and the moon is up, and the correct response to that is to put your cloak on and go and stand where you can see it properly, and then to stay up half the night afterwards, because you're too pleased to go to bed. The cold, clear evenings give her the sky, and she takes it. There's a sharp, very cold evening, after a walk beyond the woods, when she catches the new moon for the first time that month. A crescent so thin she calls it a line of silver, a bow made of thread, which is such a good description of a young moon that I've never come up with better. And it isn't alone. Jupiter and Venus are up with it, both of them gone pale, attending on it. 3 lights and a thread of moon over a frozen country, seen because she was outside at dusk in the cold, again as usual. Another walk into Easdale in the same kind of weather, mountains topped with snow, frosty and sunny, roads slippery, she calls it delightful. There's a cold walk home from a neighbour's, past the head of the vale, and the whole place is looking as wintry as it possibly can, and she notices a foxglove, one, in blossom by the side of the road, in all that. One flower out in the wrong season on a freezing evening. She just writes it down, that Withburn looked as wintry as a place can look, and yet there was a foxglove out in flower at the side of the road. That and yet is the whole of her. And there's an evening walk with a quiet shower of snow in the air for more than half of it. A quiet shower. That's the exact right phrase for that kind of snow, the sort that isn't weather so much as an atmosphere. Flakes just going about in the air without any real intention of landing. They walk home in it. The clouds come partly over. The horned moon has already set. And on the way past a big elm they startle 2 night birds out of it, which go off into the dark, and that's the last thing in the entry. There's a winter afternoon in there too when they go into the wood to gather sticks, and the whole world has gone quiet in a different way. No snow this time, just a perfect stillness, the cloud sitting so low that it spreads down to meet the water, and the sky's clouds nearly come down to join it. Earth and sky and sea, all one thing, she says. and in the middle of that the robins are singing on the bare boughs, because robins do. And she looks across a field that has a great many sheep in it, and notices that only one of them is standing up. All the rest are lying down. She counted, or near enough. Then they carried the sticks home and had dinner at 5. Only one standing. I don't know why that detail has stayed with me the way it has. Maybe because it's so obviously true and so completely useless. Nobody needed to know that. It doesn't tell us anything about the past or about her or about anything at all. It's just what a field of sheep looks like on a cold, still afternoon to a person walking past with an armful of wood, and it's in a book 200 years later, and here we are looking at it. Now let me tell you about the shortest day of the year, because it's the one where I think you see the whole system clearly. The snow's lying deep on the roads and it's beginning to thaw, which is the worst possible combination. You're walking in cold porridge, and it grabs at the feet and every step costs twice. And somebody still has to go to Ambleside for the letters. So Mary goes. She writes that it was a wearisome walk. That's about as close to a complaint as this book gets, and it isn't even her own. She's reporting somebody else's tiredness. And then, right there in the same entry, 4 words that stopped me dead the first time I read them. I stayed at home, she stayed at home, not ill as far as we're told, and not stopped by anything in particular. On the shortest day of the year, in a deep thawing snow, she let somebody else do the 9 miles and she stayed in, and her brother sat beside her and read his poem aloud to her, and he was in good spirits about it. And later he went out to meet Mary on the road, and the 2 of them came back in with 4 letters between them, 2 from one place and 2 from another, and the darkness already down by then. I find that entry unbelievably tender, and it took me a while to work out why. It's because it's the exception. 400 entries of walked, and here's one where she doesn't. On the darkest day of the year, and instead of any explanation she just gives you the fire and the poem, and her brother's good spirits, and then the 2 of them coming up the road at dusk with the post. The walking wasn't a virtue she was performing, it was just the ordinary traffic of being alive there. And on the shortest day of the year, somebody else did the traffic and she sat still. And there's something else in that entry I don't want to skate past. He went out to meet her. Her brother put his coat on at the end of the shortest day of the year, in a thawing snow, and walked up the road in the dark towards a woman coming back from Ambleside with the post, so that the last mile of a wearisome walk would have somebody in it. Nobody records that as a kindness. It just happens, in a subordinate clause, between the poem and the letters. That's the thing about a world where everything runs on legs. Affection has to be walked too. You can't send it. If you want to meet someone, you get up and go up the road until you find them. The snow on the roads goes to slush and then to water, and then the roads are just dirty again. The tops keep theirs for months. She'll look up from the garden in April and the highest ground is still white while the daffodils are out at her feet, and she'll mention both in one line without connecting them because they don't need connecting. And on some tremendous days the wind gets underneath the snow lying on the high fells and lifts it clean off sideways, so that from down in the valley it looks like smoke pouring off the top of the mountain in a long horizontal streak. She saw that. She stood somewhere in a tremendous wind and wrote down that a mountain was smoking, and then presumably went on with her afternoon. That's the winter in the end. Not an interruption of the walking year, just the walking year with a different floor under it, and different sounds in it, and a robin instead of a lark, and everything you'd normally see turned white and made heavier, and put slightly out of shape. Somewhere up in that wood the snow is still coming off the hollies, now and then in its own time. Water underneath it all going on the way water does. And a robin at the edge of the trees singing at intervals for nobody in particular. The dark isn't the end of the day here. I want to start there, because everything else in this chapter follows from it, and it's the single hardest thing to feel from where we're sitting. For us, night is when the outside closes. For her, it's just the second half. A bit cooler, a bit quieter, differently lit, but open for business. There's no other lighting. That's the whole of it. A candle throws a circle about the size of a face and it costs money and it doesn't travel. So if you want to see anything at all beyond your own hands after 4 o'clock in December, you go outside and you look up and you take what's up there. The moon isn't scenery in this life, it's the lighting. Which means she knows it the way we know a switch. She'll tell you what phase it's at, whether it's risen, whether the clouds got it, how much of it there is. Not because she's making a note of the heavens, but because that information is operationally useful. A full moon on a clear night means the road to Ambleside is walkable at 10 o'clock. A new moon behind cloud means it isn't. The sky is the timetable, and so they go out. Constantly, and late, in a way that I find almost hard to believe. There's a run of entries where they're walking home from a friend's house at 12:30 at night, at 1 o'clock in the morning, a little after 12, and she notes it was very cold. These are people who've had dinner somewhere, sat about talking, and then walked several miles home across country in the middle of the night because that's how you get home. And there's a custom running underneath all of this that took me half the book to notice, because she never explains it. She just does it, 40 or 50 times the way you don't explain shaking hands. When somebody leaves your house, you walk with them. Not to the gate, not to the end of the lane. You put your cloak on and you go with them. A mile, 2 miles, half the way to where they're going, and then at some point you stop and turn round and walk back alone in the dark. It's everywhere once you see it. She walks a friend a good part of the way to his village. She goes up with visitors as far as the blacksmith's. She walks people to the halfway point and turns. Her brother walks a neighbour's daughter home in the evening and comes back later. A friend walks her back as far as the wood, and then she does the rest on her own. Nobody in that valley ever seems to say goodbye at a door. And I've been trying to work out what that is, and I think it's this. When the only way anyone comes to you is on foot, then the visit doesn't end when the conversation does. The visit ends when the road takes over, so you give them a bit of the road. You go out into the dark with them and keep talking for another mile, and then you stop at some agreed place, some gate or bridge or turning that everyone knows, and they go on, and you go back, and the two of you are still talking about whatever it was in your own heads for the next half hour. That's an hour of walking in the cold, at 11 at night, added onto the end of every single evening with a friend. Nobody counts it. Nobody groans about it. It's just what the end of an evening is. And once you've got that habit, the late walks stop looking heroic and start looking obvious. They go over to a friend's house after dinner to meet someone, and they get home at 12:30. Another night they dine at somebody's and come in a little after midnight, and she notes that it was partially cloudy but a light night and very cold. Another, home at 1 in the morning, cloudy but not dark. Those are 3 separate ordinary evenings. Dinner, conversation, and then several miles of unlit country between 11 and 1, on foot, in wool, in winter. I've tried to picture what that road sounds like, and I keep failing, because I've never been anywhere with no engine in it. There's nothing. No hum from anywhere, no glow over the hill from anywhere else, no aeroplane, nothing at all except water going somewhere, and their own feet and their own voices, which must have sounded enormous. 2 people talking on a road at midnight in a valley with a moon over it, and the sound of them audible for half a mile and nobody to hear it. She's got a whole vocabulary for how dark it is, which is what happens when the darkness is working condition rather than a mood. A fine moonlit night, a half moon, a lovely night, and my favourite of them, cloudy, she says, but not dark. Think about how precise that is. There's cloud over, so there's no moon to see, but the cloud is lit from behind and the ground gives enough back that you can walk it fine. Cloudy but not dark. That's a distinction you only make if your ankles depend on it. There's a night when the moon comes up over the fell as they're going home, and she says the beauty of it was startling. Startling. Not lovely, not fine. Startling, as in it genuinely took her by surprise, and she'd have seen a moon rise about 4,000 times by then. It came up to them over Lothrig, and they went in and had supper at 10 o'clock, and the next line in the book is about the coal cart. That's how the sublime sits in this journal. Between a moonrise and a delivery of coal with no change in the tone of voice. Now here's the entry I'd walk a long way to have written. She's been out to a waterfall in the twilight, up at the head of that valley, and she's brought back lemon thyme and some other plants, and she gets home and it's dark, and she plants them anyway. By moonlight, she says. She planted a garden in the dark. Knelt down in the moonlight, in the cold, with the earth going black and silver, and put lemon thyme into the ground because she'd carried it home, and it wanted planting and there was enough moon to see by. And here's the thing about thyme. You don't handle it without the smell coming up. So that whole small scene has a scent in it. Out there at 9 or 10 o'clock, lemon rising off her fingers in the dark. She doesn't say a word about the beauty of it. It's just something she did that evening in one line before the next thing. That's what I keep noticing about this book. The moments I'd have made a whole paragraph out of are the ones she gives 4 words to, and the reason is simply that planting by moonlight wasn't remarkable to her. It was Tuesday, but look at what's underneath. She wasn't rushing to get the job done before the light went, because that isn't how she thinks about light. The light didn't go. It changed. The sun set and the moon took over, and she carried on with the same afternoon, and there was no moment in the whole thing where the outdoors became a place she couldn't be. And then the line right after it, which is why I've been holding this entry back. She lingered outside, she says, hoping to catch the sound of her brother's tread. That's the sentence. That's the whole of it. Sitting there at the end of an ordinary day. That's it. The plants are in. She's got no reason to be out there. And she stays anyway, in the dark, in a garden, listening for the sound of feet coming up a road. I've thought about that line more than anything else in the whole book, and I think it's because of what it tells you about how a person arrived in that world. There's no message ahead. Nobody's told her he's on his way, or which day or which hour. So the first thing she'll know about her brother coming home is a sound, a particular rhythm of shoe on stone in the dark up the road that she'd know from 100 yards. And knowing that, she goes and stands where the sound would arrive. That's why she lingered. That's the whole mechanism. Waiting had a place in that life, and the place was outdoors, in the moonlight, near the road, with your ears doing all the work. And she doesn't hear it. That night, nothing comes. She goes in eventually and writes the sentence down, and the next entry is about sitting in the garden the following day and answering a letter, and life goes on, and at some point he comes back and the latch goes up and there he is. I don't have anywhere I go to listen for anybody. Nobody arrives at my house as a sound in the distance anymore. They arrive as a message beforehand, which is easier in every measurable way and takes the standing in the garden right out of it. It isn't better or worse exactly. It's just gone, along with the ears that could tell one man's walk from another's at 100 yards, in the dark, from a garden. Here's another night, and this one's a strange kind of lovely. There's a fair on in the village, a small one, she says. Hardly any people, hardly any stalls, but plenty of cakes sold and a good deal of beer. Her brothers come home for dinner at 6. They have their tea straight after, by candlelight, and then they go out and walk up the lane and past the church. On the way up the lane, the three of them are talking, and what they're talking about is a house on Helvellyn, building one, living up there on the side of the biggest hill in view. That's the conversation on a moonlit lane after a village fair. Not gossip, not business. Where might we live, if we could live anywhere? I don't know whether they meant it. I don't think they did, particularly. It's the kind of thing you say to people you love when you're walking in the dark and there's no reason to stop talking. And what she notices is where the moonlight is. It's lying on the village. Only on the village, the way light does when the fells are throwing shadow across everything else. So there's this one lit patch of roofs and lanes down there in all that dark country. And the village has its own lights burning in it from the fair, and the moon doesn't wipe them out. She says it didn't eclipse them. Two kinds of light in the same small place, neither one winning. And then, from that lit patch, across still air, comes the sound of dancing and people enjoying themselves. It reaches her all the way up there. Not loudly, I'd guess. Just enough to know what it is. She's standing outside it. Not in the fair, out in the dark on the lane above it, hearing it come up to her. And I don't think there's a trace of exclusion in the entry. She's not sad about being outside it. She's just a person standing in the cool dark on a moonlit night, listening to a village have a good time a few 100 yards away. And she thought that was worth putting in the book, and she was right. That's what still air does. Sound travels along it for miles when the night's cold and there's nothing else making a noise. There's no engine anywhere in that valley, no hum. So a fiddle in a room in a village carries out over the fields and up the lane, and reaches a woman standing under a moon, and she gets the whole fair for free. The moon does other things to that country, and she catalogues them without ever quite meaning to. One night it's lying on the hills like snow, which is exactly it. That flat white loading on the tops that makes you look twice in October. Another night the moon's down on the water and she says it looked like herrings in there, which is a fisherman's image, silver and broken and all moving at once, and I don't think anybody's improved on it since. And there's Venus. She keeps track of Venus the way you'd keep track of a neighbour. One night she writes that Venus was almost like another moon. That's how bright and how low it must have hung. And then she adds this little piece of local knowledge, that they lose sight of her at home long before she truly goes down into the water, because the hills get in the way. She knows where her own horizon is. She knows which piece of sky her house is denied. There's a night on the water too when they've been out looking at Rydale, and it's gone so still that she calls it a dark mirror, and they row home over a lake as smooth as glass in the dark and then go and see a man about hiring a horse for her brother. That's the order of the evening. A mirror, a glass lake, and then some business about a horse. And it's on the way back from that, going home, that the moon comes up over the fell and startles her. Sitting with an open window for an hour in the moonlight, on a night when the full moon came up over the sea in what she calls uncommon majesty, climbing slowly through the cloud. An hour, just sitting there at a window in the cold, watching a moon go up. There's an evening walk to Rydell where a friend stops behind with her on the road, and he dams up a little runnel at the roadside with stones to make a lake out of it. A grown man building a small pond in the dark for no reason on the way home. And then they all stand and look at the glowworm rock, which is a place, a named place in their private geography, and what's growing on it is a primrose, and the primrose is looking out at the road from its own shelter in the rock. They'd named a rock after the insects that light up on it. That tells you how many times they'd walked that road after dark, and they stood there and looked at a primrose growing on it, because it was theirs and it was there and they were passing. Nothing happened. That's the entry. And here's the one that closes it for me. They walk up the road to the Swan and come back over the hill at Rydell, mild and warm, and they see 6 glowworms shining faintly on the way, and when they get home the fire's gone out, nobody's kept it in. So they eat their supper in the dark and go straight to bed. Supper in the dark. No fuss made about it at all, nothing relit, no candle spent on it. They came in from a moonlit walk and ate whatever there was, sitting in a black room, feeling for it, and then went straight up. That's the last line of the entry, and once, in early February, she writes that the moonlight at 9 o'clock was as still and as warm as any summer night in February. That's a fluke of weather she'd have had no way of knowing was coming, and she was outside in it, because she was always outside in it, and so she got the one warm night of the winter instead of hearing about it afterwards. The road's still there in the moonlight, going up the vale, grey between its walls, somebody's fiddle a long way off, faint, and then not there at all, lemon thyme in the ground by the door, watered in, and the smell of it still on a pair of hands. The moon's got another hour or two in it before the fell takes it. She's standing out there in the cold a while longer, just in case, and then she'll go in. The road has people on it. That's the thing I wasn't ready for, and it's obvious once you've thought about it for 2 seconds, and I'd somehow never thought about it. If everybody has to walk, then everybody's out there. The road isn't a strip of tarmac with sealed boxes going along it at speed. It's the place where the entire population of a valley happens to be, all day, at 3 miles an hour, close enough to speak. So she meets people. Constantly. And because they're all going the same pace, meeting somebody isn't a glance. It's a conversation that lasts however long you're both going the same way, which might be an hour. Here's one that made me laugh out loud. She's walking over to Ambleside one evening, taking the way round by the lake, and 2 people from over the county boundary overtake her. Overtake mine, they're going faster than she is. And as they pass, they pay her a compliment on her walking. On her walking. 2 complete strangers on a road, going to sell cloth and various odd things they've made themselves at the market in the next town, and they take the trouble to tell a woman they've never met that she's got a good pace on her. I love everything about that. It means walking was a skill you could be observed to have. It means there was a standard, and she was above it, and it was noticeable enough that 2 people carrying their own goods to market thought it worth remarking on as they went by. She writes it down without a flicker of vanity, in among the flowers and the letters, and moves straight on to the next thing. Then there's John Fisher, who catches her up on the far side of Rydell. And John Fisher wants to talk. He talks the whole way, and what he talks about is the times changing, and the way he puts it has stayed with me for weeks. He says that before long there'll only be 2 sorts of people left, the very rich at one end and the very poor at the other, and nothing in between. Because the ones with small holdings are being forced to sell, he says, and the land is all going into one hand. That's a man on a road, in about 1800, telling his neighbour what he thinks is happening to his country. Not a pamphlet, not a speech, just talk, on the way home, at walking pace, from a man who lives there and can see it going on around him. And she wrote it down, not to make a point. There's no argument in the entry, no comment from her at all, no agreeing or disagreeing. She just put down what John Fisher said, because John Fisher said it, and it was the conversation she'd had that evening. Then the next line says she didn't get home until 10 o'clock. I keep sitting with that, because I don't think we have this anymore, and I'm not sure what replaced it. Where do you hear what your neighbour thinks about the age you're both living through, at length, with nobody performing, not shouting it, not at anybody, just saying it, to one person, on a walk, because you've got 4 miles of road left and the subject's on your mind? There's another layer to it as well, which I only noticed about halfway through. Everybody on that road knows everybody. not in a sentimental way, in a practical one. She names them as she passes. That's Fisher, that's Fleming, that's the Simpsons coming back with her through the frosty air after tea. Her neighbours aren't people she waves at. They're people she has walked several hundred miles alongside half a mile at a time over years, and that's a kind of knowing you can't get any other way. I've been trying to work out what that does to a village, and I think the answer is that it makes one. Not a set of houses near each other, an actual thing, made out of overlapping walks, everybody's routes crossing everybody else's several times a week at a speed where you have to speak. And now, the one I'd most like you to have. They're going along the shore to Rydale to fetch the letters, and coming the other way is the postman. She calls him their patient bow-bent friend, which tells you two things about him straight away. He's bent over, and they know him. He's got his little wooden box on his back. That's the post. That's the whole system. The wooden box on the back of an old man, walking. He asks them where they're going. To Rydale, they say, for letters. And he tells them there's two of theirs in the box. So they lift the lid, right there on the road, and there they are. They're letters. In a box, on a man's back, in the open air, halfway between one village and another. They take them out and turn round and go home. That's my favourite piece of infrastructure I've ever come across. No counter, no queue, no opening hours to speak of. You meet the post coming the other way on a road, and you stop him, and you open him up, and you take your own mail out, and then everyone carries on in the direction they were already going. And then she does something in the next line that I think is the finest thing in the whole book. She notes that they outstripped him. They went off far ahead of him, because he's old and bent and pushing on as hard as he can, straddling along at his own slow pace, and two young people with their letters in their hands are just faster. And having noticed that, she can't leave it alone. She says she couldn't help comparing lots with him. Comparing lots. That's her phrase. She's thinking about the fact that this man walks that road every single morning, whatever the weather, does a hard day's work at the end of it, and then walks back at night however tired he is, and takes it all quietly, and has his supper and does it again tomorrow. And she's just watched herself and her brother sail past him with their good legs and their letters. I don't have anything clever to say about that. She saw him. That's all. Out of the entire population of that valley who walk that road, most of them are gone completely. But the bow-bent man with the box is here, 200 years later, because a woman going the other way looked at him properly and then thought about him afterwards. She sees clothes, by the way, in a way I've never quite managed. When you're walking towards someone for 5 minutes, you have time to take them in, and the taking in is all visual, because you've no idea who they are otherwise. So she reads people the way you'd read a page. There's a man she passes with bags hung over each shoulder, hanging down on both sides of him, below the chest. One bag's brownish, and made of something coarse. The other's white with meal all over the outside of it, and the meal has got onto him too, so his blue waistcoat's gone white with it. That's a man who works with flour, walking home in the evening wearing his own trade. And there's old Fleming, whom they overtake at Rydale, on a slippery road, leading his small grandchild along by the hand. And she notices that the two of them have the same face. Just the same face. The old one and the young one going along together. And the grandfather is being careful. She can see him being careful, on the slippery bit. And at the same time, she says, looking proud of his charge. Then she looks at his coat, because she always looks at the coat. It's faded, a sort of claret colour gone soft with age, and it's been mended at both shoulder blades with 2 square patches of new cloth, one on each side, and the new cloth hasn't faded yet, so it's darker. So the man's got 2 bright patches on his back, one at each shoulder, and she says they looked like eyes. Like eyes. An old man walking away from you up a road, holding a child's hand with 2 eyes sewn onto his back. And the reason those patches are there at all is that shoulder blades are where a coat wears through first, if you carry things, and he'd carried things all his life, and somebody had sat down and put good cloth over the holes. She saw all of that in the time it took to overtake him. I couldn't invent that. Nobody could. That's what you get from a person who has nothing to do with her time, except walk past other people slowly enough to see them. And then there's the old sailor, and I want to tell this one slowly because it's the entry where she's hardest on herself, and she doesn't spare herself an inch of it. It's the only place in the whole journal where I felt I was watching someone catch themselves out, and she catches herself, and then she writes it down anyway, which is harder than the walking ever was. They come up behind an old man on the road who's plainly begging. She can tell from the 2 bags over his shoulder, and she doesn't stop. She says so, and she says exactly why, and I find her honesty here almost uncomfortable. Half laziness, she says, half indifference, and partly to see whether he'd speak first if she let him go by. He didn't speak. He said nothing at all and went on past her, and that was that. The test she'd set him without telling him was over, and he'd failed it by keeping quiet, and she was free to walk on with a clear road ahead. Two people going the same way at the same speed, and neither of them saying anything, and then the distance between them opening up again. And then, in her words, her heart smote her. So she turns round. She goes back up the road after him, and she says, "You are begging?" And he says, "Aye." And she gives him something. Then her brother, looking him over, has a guess at it. "You were a sailor, I suppose?" And the old man says, "Ay," again, and then the whole thing comes out. 57 years at sea, 12 of them on a warship, 75 years old, standing on a road in the Lake District with 2 bags. Her brother asks him why he hasn't got a pension, and the answer is the one that finishes it. He hasn't got one. He could have got a place in the hospital at Greenwich where old sailors went, but all his officers are dead. That's it. That's the whole reason. The men who could have spoken for him are gone, and so there's nothing. And so here he is on a road at 75. And she looks at him, the way she looks at everyone. There's a freshish colour still up in the cheeks, grey hair, a hat that's decent enough bound round its edge and worn brown and glossy with the ears. Glossy, which is what a hat goes after, enough handling and enough weather. And his shoes are small and thin, low at the sides, and pretty good. Better than they should be. And she works out why, and she puts it in one flat sentence. Those shoes had come off a gentleman. I've read that line about 40 times. She's standing in a road looking at an old man's feet, and she can see that his shoes came off somebody else. Somebody gave them to him, or he got them some other way, and they're too good and too fine for the rest of him, and they're what he's got. And here's the thing I can't get past about him. She never gives his name. 57 years of a man's life at sea, and the shape of his shoes, and the colour of his cheeks, and the state of his hat. And no name. She didn't ask, or she asked and didn't write it down, and either way he's gone. So there's a stranger standing in the middle of the most detailed portrait in the whole journal, and nobody alive knows what he was called. That's what the record does. It keeps the hat and it loses the man. And I think she'd have hated that if anyone had put it to her, and I think she'd have had no idea how to fix it either. There's another day when a woman at Rydale, stout, well-dressed, a village woman, nothing about her that looked like it, asks her for a halfpenny, and she said, this woman, that she'd never done it before. Never. Only these were hard times, and that's the whole of the entry, and then she's home, and setting slips of privet in the ground, and the evening's cold, and she's got a fire, and her face is bright red from it, and it's 9 o'clock and she'll go to bed now. She doesn't editorialise. She doesn't build anything out of it. The woman and the privet and the fire and the red face all go down in the same voice, one after another, and that's the day. And I've decided I think that's a kindness, though it took me a while to see it that way. She could have made something of that woman. She could have written a paragraph about the state of the country, or about pity, and the woman would have become an example of something. Instead, she gets one sentence, in her own words, standing up well-dressed, saying the true thing, that she'd never done this before and that times were hard. Then the walk goes on. Nobody gets turned into a lesson. She's allowed to say her piece on a road and be let alone, which is more or less what any of us would want. And there's an old man driving a big handsome bull along the road, with a cow as well, and he's walking with 2 sticks. 2, so he needs both. And he's moving a bull along a public road with them. She met him and she wrote him down, and then she came home the long way, round past the bridge, and on the way she was noticing how green the valley had gone, and stopping to sit down over and over even though it was cold. That's the entry, and it's a perfectly good one, and the bull is in it for a single clause and then gone. And what strikes me, laying them all out like that, is how little she does with any of them. There's no lesson attached. She doesn't tell you what to feel about the sailor. She doesn't tell you John Fisher was right or wrong about the land. She doesn't say the postman deserved better, though she plainly thought it. She just puts them down, one at a time, in the order they happened to her, with the hats and the bags and the shoes and the exact words they said, and lets them be what they were. I think that's why they're still here. If she'd made an argument out of them, they'd have gone stale with the argument. Instead, she made nothing out of them at all, and so they're just people, standing in a road, in the past looking about as alive as anybody I've read this year. That's the traffic then. A pair of peddlers, a postman with a box on his back, a miller white with his own flour, an old man with 2 eyes sewn onto his coat, a sailor in a dead officer's shoes, a woman who'd never asked for anything before this year, a neighbour with his theory about the land, and a man with 2 sticks and a bull. None of them going anywhere fast, all of them going somewhere, every single one of them doing it on their own legs, in whatever the sky's doing, carrying whatever they've got to carry. She's out there with the whole of them, and they can all see her, and she can see all of them, for exactly as long as it takes to pass. The last mile is different from the other 8, and anybody who's walked a long way knows exactly what I mean. Something in the legs gives up its argument. You're not deciding anything anymore, you're just being carried the rest of the way by whatever's left, and the road comes down the vale, and the roofs appear below you, and one of them is yours. She comes down that road hundreds of times in these pages, and she almost never makes anything of it. There's no arriving in this book, no triumph, no relief written out, no sitting down heavily with a sigh. That's the whole ending most nights, a door and then the rest of it. And the shape of it is always the same, whichever road she's coming on. There's the turn where the veil opens under you, and then the walls close in again, and then it's just the last stretch of grey stone between 2 hedges, with the water making its noise off to the side. She could have done it with her eyes shut, and on plenty of nights she more or less did. The fire's the first fact. It's either in or it's out, and both of those happen. On the good nights there's a fire going and she gets in front of it and stays there. And there's one evening where she describes what that does to her. She says her face was flame-coloured. Not warm, flame-coloured. That's what happens to a face that's been out in the cold for 4 hours and then put a foot from an open fire. It goes scarlet and it burns and it's the best feeling in the world. And then she writes that it's 9 o'clock and she'll go to bed now. 9 o'clock. That's the whole evening. Home, privet planted, fire, red face, bed. And I'd like to point out what isn't in that list, which is anything at all resembling a reward. She didn't earn the fire. There's no sense anywhere in these pages that a hard walk has been paid off by a warm room. The walk was the day, and the fire is the end of the day, and one doesn't buy the other. And I think that's why the fire's so good. She's not owed it, she's just cold, and now she isn't. And on the bad nights there's no fire at all, because nobody was in to keep it, and they eat their supper in the dark and go straight up. She reports both in the same voice. The fire being out isn't a disaster, it's just the state of the fire, and there's a house waiting behind that door with other people's lives in it, which is easy to forget when you've been following one woman down a road for 3 hours. Molly's been in, or is in. There's an evening where somebody's ill and she stands in the kitchen and broils him a mutton chop, and he eats it in bed, and that's the end of a day that also had a walk in it. There's another where she comes back and sets herself to picking up all the clothes her brother's flung down here, there and in every other corner, and files 2 months of newspapers, and gets her own dinner, which is 2 boiled eggs and 2 apple tarts. Then she puts Molly on to tidying the garden. And then, this is the bit, and I myself have walked, she says, after all that. She'd already walked, or she went again, and either way it's in there, in the same breath as the eggs. Supper's at 10 some nights, which surprised me until I thought about the light. If you're out until dark and the dark is when you come home, then supper is whenever you get in, and getting in is whenever the walk ends. The clock doesn't organise the day here. The road does, and the light does, and between the two of them there's not much left for a clock to decide. And she's tired. I want to be clear about that, because I've spent 7 chapters admiring her, and I don't want to leave you with some tireless creature striding about the fells. She writes that she was tired to death. Those are her words, more than once. She walks back and forth to a neighbour's until she's worn out. She goes up to bed before her brother because she can't stay up any longer, and on one of those nights he comes down to her and reads his poem to her in bed. He'd kindled the fire that afternoon and started writing, and they'd carried cloaks out into the orchard and sat there a while, and she'd left him to it and gone up because she couldn't stay awake any longer. And he finished it, and then came down the stairs with it. I love that more than I can say. She's done in, she's gone up. And he comes down the stairs with the thing he's been working at all day and reads it to her while she's lying there half asleep because he's finished it, and she's the person you read it to. There's no walking left in her at all, and the day still has that in it. And once, coming back from Keswick after the New Year, she's later than expected. The visit ran on, the roads were what they were, and her brother gets worried about it. So he walks out. Not to the gate. He gets to about 3 miles short of Keswick itself, which is 13 miles or so from his own door, going up over the pass in January, because his sister was taking longer than he'd thought, and there was no other way on earth to find out where she'd got to. That's the only search party available in 1803. A man in a coat, walking towards where you might be. And a few days after that, there's an evening she describes coming home just before sunset, when the whole thing turned soft on them. A gentle day, she calls it, and then a heavenly evening, with a low sky lying among the hills that was more like sky than cloud, and a summer kind of sunshine over the top of it, and the turf underfoot looking warm, in January. She'd walked a friend to the foot of the next valley and come back and got that. Then there's the writing itself, which is the last thing that happens most nights, and which is the reason any of this exists at all. It's easy to skate over that. Somebody who has walked 9 miles, made a dinner, dealt with a garden, and got a fire going, then sits down in candlelight and writes the day out. Here's how it started. Her brothers have gone away for a while. She's alone in the house, and she decides she's going to keep a journal of the time until they get back. And then she tells us why, in one sentence, and it's the most modest reason anybody has ever had for writing anything. 2 reasons, in fact. The first, because she won't quarrel with herself. That's her phrase. She'd made a resolution, and she wasn't going to be the kind of person who breaks one, so she kept it. Not for the reader, not for posterity, but to stay on decent terms with herself. And the second, because it would give William something to enjoy when he got back. That's it. That's the whole motive of the greatest walking diary in the language. Don't fall out with yourself and have something ready that'll please your brother when he walks back in. Nobody was ever supposed to see this. That's what I keep having to remind myself of, and it's what makes the whole thing land. There's no performance in it because there was no audience, not a small audience, none. The uninteresting evening at the blacksmith's is in there because she went, and the 6 glowworms are in there because she counted them, and the sailor's shoes are in there because she looked at them. Not one word of it was written to be admired, and I think that's precisely why it survived, and why the great grand poems of that valley feel further away from us now than her account of getting soaked on the way to Keswick. She wasn't making anything, she was just keeping the day. There's an evening in there that I've hesitated over, and I'll tell it because it's true and she told it. She'd been low, she says she'd been very melancholy, and on the walk back she had some of her saddest thoughts, and she couldn't keep the tears in. And then, and this is why I'm telling you, she says that when she came to Grasmere she felt that it did her good. The walk did it. Not a conversation, not a remedy, not anything anybody said. 4 miles of road and the sight of her own valley at the end of it, and something in her had settled enough to go in and finish a letter. She'd been crying on the way, and by the time she got there she was better, and she wrote both halves down without making a story out of either. That's not something I can improve on by explaining it, and I'm not going to try. Some things aren't insights, they're just weather that goes through a person. I think you either know that feeling already, or you've got it coming. Here's my favourite thing they ever did, and it's small. She's out with William on the road to Keswick at the turn of the year. They stop by a ledge at the roadside, and on it there's a tuft of primroses. 3 of them in full flower and 1 still a bud, growing up out of the green moss, and they stand there and they debate it. Should we pick them? For a long time, she says, they debated long, and in the end they left them there to live out their own day. 2 flowers and a bud and a 3rd one open, and a pair of people standing on a road in the cold deciding at length that they'd rather the primroses went on standing there than came home in a hand. Then they got on with the journey, that's her phrase for it, to live out their day. 2 people stopped a journey to hold a proper discussion about whether to pick 3 flowers, and decided not to, and went on. And then, this is the bit, she comes back that way the Sunday after, and she looks, and they're still there. Still growing, she says, unhurt by the cold or the wet, exactly where they'd been, and she writes that she was right glad of it. Which means she'd thought about those primroses all week. Somewhere in Keswick over New Year, among people, she'd been carrying the question of whether 3 flowers on a ledge were still alive. And when she came back over that road she looked for them, and they were there, and it made her happy, and she said so in a sentence and went on. I don't have a clever thing to say about that either. I just think a life in which that's possible has something in it that mine hasn't got. I'm not sure it's recoverable, and I've stopped pretending I'm going to get it back by trying harder at it, because trying is exactly the thing she wasn't doing. Because here's the honest end of all this. It's not that we've become worse at looking, it's that the conditions are gone. She got her eye on her road and her 3 sounds in the snow because there was no other way to move, no other way to send a letter, no other light after dark, and no other entertainment on a moonlit night than to walk out and see a mountain. Every single one of those absences was, in its own way, a hardship, and every single one of them has been solved. And I want to be careful not to be sentimental about that, because the absences weren't charming. A man of 75 walked that road with 2 bags because nobody would give him a pension. A boy walked 9 miles in the rain for coppers. The bow-bent postman did it every single day of his life and then did a day's work on top. The slowness that gave her the scarlet moss was the same slowness that ground those 3, and she knew it, which is why she compared lots with him instead of admiring the view. We solved them, and we were right to, and the walking went with them. It couldn't not. Nobody gave it up. It just stopped being necessary, and the things that aren't necessary go quietly. And after a while there's a word for the thing you do instead. A walk, exercise, steps. And the word is small, and it has a frame round it, and it lasts 40 minutes. I'm not going to tell you to walk more. She wouldn't have understood the instruction. What I'd say instead is only this. Hers wasn't a practice. It was just where she was. All those hours of moss and hail and moonlight and strangers weren't collected. They accumulated. On the way to the eggs, on the way to the post, on the way home. The journal runs out in the end. There's no ceremony about it. The very last days are cold ones, and she writes that the cold was so black that it made them slow to put themselves forward, and so they didn't walk at all. Mary reads Chaucer to her in the morning. There's a letter from Keswick. She reads some of the Knight's Tale and enjoys it very much. Her sister-in-law is downstairs copying out poems, and the last line she writes is this. William, she says, has been working there beside her, and with that, she tells us, this imperfect summary ends. That's the final sentence. That's how it stops. An imperfect summary. Of 4 years, of 1,000 walks, of a country she'd looked at harder than anyone before or since. She closed the book on it the way you'd close a door on an ordinary room. And there's one more entry I keep in my pocket, and it's about 4 sentences long, and I want to leave you with it because I think it's the truest thing in the book about how she actually lived. It's Christmas Day, she says so, and gives the date, and then tells the page that she's 31 years old now. And then, a dull day, she says, and frosty. That's it. That's the birthday, that's the Christmas, that's the whole of her account of turning 31, her age and the weather, in that order, with equal weight, and then straight on to the next thing that happened. I've thought about why that gets me, and I think it's because there's no wanting in it. She's not measuring the year, or herself, or where she thought she'd be by now. She's 31, and it's dull and frosty, and both are true, and neither needs anything doing about it. And tomorrow, if the road's walkable, she'll walk. The road's still there, of course. It's still 4.5 miles to Ambleside. The birch is long gone, and there'll be another one at that corner, doing the same thing in the same wind, and there'll be scarlet on the moss in the spring, and a belt of daffodils along a shore somewhere, laying their heads on the stones. Nobody's walking out to meet the post anymore, and nobody needs to, and nobody's standing in a garden at 10 at night listening for a footstep on the stones. I don't think anybody wants to, particularly. I'm not sure they should. What she had came at a price that we've spent 200 years refusing to pay again, and on the whole I think we were right, and I'd say so to her face if I could, and I'd like to know what she'd say back. But the fire's still the best thing in the world when you've been cold for 4 hours, and the last mile still carries you, the way it carried her, down the grey road between the walls with the roofs coming up below and one of them yours. Let's stand on that road one last time before we let it go. Just for a moment, and then we'll leave it be. It's dark now, and the clouds off the top of Silver How, and there's a woman coming down the last of it towards a low door with a fire behind it. She's cold. Her shoes are wet through, and her hair's flat against her neck, and she's carrying nothing at all. Tomorrow she'll do it again. And somewhere behind her, still out there, are the others. The bent old man with the wooden box on his back, pushing on at his own pace with everybody's letters in it. The boy going for the post in the rain for a few coppers. Molly, walking down the road to fetch a basket that got too heavy. The two peddlers off to market with their own cloth on their backs. Not one of them kept a journal. Not one of them was ever going to be read. They walked those same miles, in the same weather, on the same stones, and the whole record of them is a handful of clauses in somebody else's book. A hat, a coat with two patches, a slow pace, a kindness in a doorway. I think about them more than I expected to, and I'd like, before we finish, to just leave a little space here for all of them. All the people who went up and down that road for 40 years and left nothing behind at all. They were there. It was their road too, and you're not on it. That's the good part. You're warm and you're lying down and there's nothing you have to fetch tonight and nowhere you have to walk to. The letter can wait. The post isn't in. Everything that road was for has been solved, quietly, over 200 years, so that you could be exactly where you are right now, with your eyes closed, going nowhere. If something in this stayed with you, one of the people on the road, or the sound of the snow coming off the hollies, or that woman standing in her garden at 10 at night listening for a footstep, I'd be glad to know it if you feel like saying so below. There's no need, only if you want to, and if you'd like more of these, we'll keep making them. That's what this channel is. Long, slow, unhurried journeys back into the ordinary days of the past. We'll walk through medieval kitchens and Roman streets and the quiet rooms of ancient Egypt, and we'll go at this pace every time because we think the small true things are worth more at this hour than the big loud ones. If you'd like to come along, you're very welcome to follow, and we'd be glad to have you with us as this place grows. Thank you for spending these hours here. It means a great deal, more than I can put well. The fire's gone low. Outside, the road's still there in the dark, going up the vale between its walls, the way it's gone for 200 years and will go for 200 more. Nobody's walking it tonight. It's just lying there, grey and quiet, with the water going along beside it, and nothing at all being asked of anyone. Rest now. Sleep well.